It's great to be here, and it's great to introduce our speaker for this afternoon. Zachary Gallant is, am I pronouncing it right?
That's good.
Zachary Gallant is the author of War, a children's book, and The Forgotten War Crimes, State Sovereignty, Ethnic Cleansing, and the Autonomous Revolution. He spent 2008 to 2009 on a Fulbright scholarship researching post-conflict redevelopment in the former Yugoslavia, and holds an MA in International Politics from the University of London's Goldsmiths College. He currently lives in Germany, where he works as Director of Development for a refugee integration project. He teaches German to refugees and lectures on refugee issues and on Jewish concepts of peaceful coexistence at universities and organizations across the country. Zach says that his most important role, though, is as a full-time father of two sons to whom War, a children's book, was dedicated. I had the pleasure of meeting Zach at the Muslim-Jewish Conference in Berlin a couple of summers ago, last summer, and was blown away by both his inspirational work on refugee and migrant integration, but also his dedicated commitment to addressing war and conflict and connecting with young people on this very difficult and dark topic. So it's with great pleasure that I introduced Zachary Gallant and pass on the mic to you.
Thank you very much. This mic is good? Okay. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Usra. Thanks to your colleagues at the Office of Religion and Global Affairs. This is the second time I've been invited to talk to the State Department about War, a children's book. The last time was a much more intimate gathering at Religion and Global Affairs. It's an honor to be invited back. Thank you to Julie Arrighetti, Sarah Shu, Joan Scherer, and the rest of the Ralph J. Bunch library staff for organizing this. As Usra mentioned, parenthood is my ultimate job. It's the greatest job in the world. I've had a good number of jobs, interesting, terrible. None were ever as rewarding as full-time fatherhood. But it's also a terrifying responsibility. Not just parenthood, but any job that puts you in charge of molding the brains, the rapidly developing brains of young people. They're deeply impressionable, and the way we answer children's questions shapes the way children interact with the world, and in a very real way shapes the world to come. So that is what we are working to gently do here with the subject of war. So that's what the War, a Children's Book project is about. The project to date is a rhyming answer to the question, why is there war? The English version is available online for purchase and in select bookstores, but also for free download on the internet so that every child has access to this, to the closest I could come to an answer. The first four translations into Kiswahili, German, Serbo-Croatian, and Arabic are done or nearly done. And I've been very impressed with the translators. The Kiswahili and German are on the table in front of us in case anyone has linguistic capacities with those languages. We would love to have you check them out. The expansion of this project, though, has been much slower than it might have been were it not an all-volunteer project. The social media, the project management, illustrations, translations, and the original text itself, as well as the just year of edits, has entirely been a labor of love. For me, it's a labor of love for my children. It's to give them a world that's worth growing up in and then worth inheriting. So that is what we are attempting to do, broad spectrum. The project's expansion is made, in fact, the project itself is made possible by the Department of State. A State Department funded, so an A-Smile Flex grantee from the former Yugoslavia inspired my own Fulbright grant proposal when she misunderstood what I was talking about when I was talking about bombed out houses in Baltimore City. She took it as a very Yugoslav perspective, literally bombed houses. I was speaking of the uninhabitable, thousands of uninhabitable houses throughout the city. But this miscomprehension led to a Fulbright proposal, which led to my year in studying, researching post-conflict redevelopment in the former Yugoslavia, and then my extra years in the region thereafter. Additionally, the Flex grantee who asked that question is now our project manager and Serbo-Croatian translator for this project, so she has been very deeply involved. Additionally, the Fulbright Network has brought us in contact with Jason Margaria, who will tell his own story, but was deeply influenced by the Fulbright program, I would say. So we thank the State Department immensely for all of your assistance with what we do. While I was on my State Department-funded Fulbright grant, my 6-year-old cousin at the time asked his grandfather, "Why is there war?" I don't know where the question came from. He may have seen it on television. It may be that his mother is an adopted refugee of war and he had somehow heard snippets of conversation about it. However, he asked, nobody had an answer for him, and they forwarded his question on to me as someone who was working in a post-war zone, continued conflict zone, as the only one in the family who was really in that right now. And I fumbled. I didn't have an answer. Greed, resource control, negligent media, selfish politicians, ignorance, economics, humanitarian and military industrial complexes, these are way too theoretical for a child. And I tried my best, but I was just not ready to give an answer. And I've already mentioned how terrifying it is to mold the minds of the future. If you fumble this question, like I did, the kid comes away with a mind clouded by the prospects of war. So frightened, and yeah, I could have answered it better. I have other friends who ask questions like those on the screen. A 3-year-old saw war on the television and on the news with his mother and asked, do they kill children? And the mother answered honestly, yes. Yes, sometimes that happens. And the kid thought for a moment and said, we should go first and kill them. And his mother responded empathetically, or we could go steal their weapons and put them in the sea, and attempted to make it a nonviolent response, but they're faced with war anytime they are faced with media. It is there. German 4-year-olds were planning in the kindergarten to flee to Poland. If there is any place I am not fleeing, it is Poland. But that's my own personal experience. But these kids in Germany know that the war is coming to Germany, and they know that they have a plan to flee to Poland when it comes. This is how kids are interacting with it, and they need an answer. They need a responsible answer to deal with it. So I didn't have that. Fortunately, I had good questions. There was another Fulbrighter while I was in the former Yugoslavia who complained about the thing the Fulbright program did not provide her was a method of dealing humanely with someone you find morally objectionable. She had dealt with a black South African who had put a white South African in a pile of tires and lit him ablaze, and this was a brutal murder. And this was also one of her interview subjects who she had to deal with as a human being. She had a Croatian general who was bragging about the atrocities that he'd committed and told her that, I am looking at you like cat looks at piece of bacon. And she had to sit there and not react as she wanted to react, but deal with him as a person. And it was really hard for her. And she wished she'd been better prepared, but how do you prepare someone for that? That is, how do you humanize the inhuman? I had an experience on the 10th anniversary of the NATO bombing of Serbia where my Serbian friends sent me out of the country because the anti-American sentiment was getting very strong, and it was known that I was the American. And so they put me on a train from Novi Sad to Kiev. And I got on this train, and there was a large Serbian man with a couple of bottles of his homemade alcohol, and a couple of loaves of homemade bread, and a couple of loaves of homemade, sausage. And we had a beautiful time for the next 4 hours until we got to Budapest, where we got off the train and had a beautiful time for 2 hours in Budapest before getting back on the train, just the best of friends. And we sat on the train for 2 to 3 more hours before the conversation turned to politics. And somehow it moved to Arkan, the general of, or the leader of Arkan's Tigers in the Yugoslav wars, one of the worst bands of paramilitary war criminals. And I, in my slightly inebriated state, insulted Arkan. And my friend slammed his fist on the table and declared that Arkan is simply a man who loved his country. The Muslims love nothing. And told me about his service with Arkan. And I had been becoming good friends with a mass-murdering rapist who believed that he was doing the best for his land, protecting his people. How do I reconcile these two thoughts, that this man is a mass-murdering war criminal rapist and really kind-hearted to me? How do I possibly reconcile that he can be both of those things? And that is, this is a conflicting truth, and Jason will address in his part of the speech the section of the children's book that works to confront such an issue. But it definitely led the question, and that was entirely because of a State Department question. So thank you again. So I've been studying conflict, or I had been, for about a decade before living and writing in it and writing about it for 6 years before writing this text. But it was also a part of my story from prior to that. My family is featured, part of my family is featured in Berlin's Museum to the Murdered Jews of Europe. We were just at the Holocaust Remembrance reception downstairs, and that has been a part of my story from the very beginning. My grandfather was a medic at Pearl Harbor. War has been there, conflict has been there, othering has been there from the start. But then I married and had children with a German woman whose family had been part of the German war machine in World War II. And I guess the question became, how do I show my own children that it's not just that half of their bloodline is murderers and half of their bloodline is victims. These are people. And it's deeply important that they recognize that they are not just a product of murderers and victims. So I had been working on the forgotten war crimes for a series of years, working with nationalists and with autonomous activists and with their victims throughout autonomous-seeking regions worldwide, and refugees from the Middle East and war criminals from all over the place. And all of these, so my personal history, but also my work, led to hopefully finding an answer at the end. So after a decade of steeping in it, it just sort of happened in a night. Everything just got written the moment I learned I was going to be a father. How am I going to answer this for my kid? It's a fully selfish project. My kid needs an answer. I failed to answer it for my cousin. I failed to answer it for years for the other kids. My kid needs an answer. And so in a single night, it all came out, and that was really, unfortunately, the easy part. It was edited for the following year by at least 100 different people, veterans and child victims of war, and psychologists in Latin American orphanages, and trauma psychologists from everywhere, and teachers, and parents, and also children, until we had something that was deemed correct, but also safe. And so the work paid off, and it was released, and it met with great enthusiasm, such as the enthusiasm from my friend Jason here.
Good morning, everybody. First of all, I would like to acknowledge that this is big for me. I wish my mother would see this. Hopefully we have technology and we have recordings. She's going to see this and say, I'm proud of my son. It's not every day that somebody gets to talk at the Department of State Library. I'm a teacher in the US, and I teach Introduction to Popular Culture at Bowling Green State University. And I'm going to tell you what I normally tell my students in the first day of class. I come from Kenya, so I have an accent. So I'm going to take care of the content, and you guys don't mind the accent. Okay, but if there's anything that I will not enunciate properly, please forgive me for that. So as I've said, I'm a teacher. I'm a former Fulbright scholar at Yale University. My Fulbright was different from that of Zach's. Zach's was research-based. Mine was to come to the US to teach Kiswahili, which is a language that is spoken in Kenya. It was kind of weird at first because in Kenya I took a degree in English and literature, and I was coming to teach Kiswahili because in Kenya we speak Kiswahili, so like it is assumed that you know Kiswahili, so you can go use the English that you learned to help the American students to learn Kiswahili. I was fortunate enough to get to teach Kiswahili at Yale University. And as a teacher, you have to teach the language and the culture itself. So I first of all stumbled into this project on the Fulbright Alumni Network. And Zach was asking if there are any people who would volunteer to translate this book. And I was like, this is really a nice idea because, first of all, I teach language, and I've been teaching Kiswahili in the US, and I can relate with this, with the material in the book. So I grew up in Kenya. I don't know if there's anybody who has been to Kenya here or who speaks Kiswahili. Is there anybody who speaks Kiswahili? Now, this is the teacher part of me. I normally ask questions to the audience. This tendency don't go away. So you don't speak Kiswahili, so I'll not get to read maybe a paragraph of what I translated. But anyways, so I grew up in Kenya, and Kenya, according to me, it was a very peaceful place. In the 90s when I grew up, very peaceful. But I never knew that in 1992 there was a war. But I was so young, so I never knew. In 2007, there was a post-election violence. That is when now I interacted with real war, because I was in a different part of Kenya where my people are not supposed to be. They're supposed to be on the other side of the country. That is when I first interacted. So I live in Nandi County. Nobody knows Nandi County probably over here. Which is far from home per se, but if you ask me any day, I would tell you that my home is Nandi County, because that is where I was born, that is where we have a house, that is where I've been going every time. So as I said, my parents never told me that in 1992 there was war. So we had one television set and one radio, which was my father's radio. No one would touch that. So we would hear about all these things going on in the world, violence and stuff. But since we had watched very many American movies around that time, these things that we would see on television were this is kind of fictional. We see this in movies, and now we are seeing this in the news. You don't even get to think about it because you're a young boy, and you're I don't know, you don't even think about it. It's entertainment for you. In 2007, after the post-election violence, I was in high school in third year because of the post-violence that happened in Kenya. My people, or the people in my community, were being chased away and stuff. Then I was thinking about it, and I was in high school. I was confused. Even though at this age you should be able to know what war is, but I have never interacted with war. That's why this is so dear to me. And then later on, I came to realize that the 1992 war is the one that caused my sister to pass away later on in life because of living outside in the cold and stuff. She contracted pneumonia, and then later on it killed her. So this is really dear to me. And I have met very many people who have been in real war situations, who have lost loved ones, like people who have lost like 10 family members or 15. When I was at Yale last year, we did a research about language because I'm a language teacher. We did a research on language and refugees from East and Central Africa who had come to the US. We were asking them, now that they're in the US, are they going to forget their language? So I interacted with them and I listened to their stories. And some of those stories were really, really so harrowing. And that is why when I came across this project, I was like, I have to do something about it. Because if I don't, who else is going to do this? Because I'm the one who accessed this website and contacted Zach. So I don't know if anybody would have done it. Probably yes, but this is a message that needs to be passed across, and that is why I got involved. So as you can see on the slides, Kiswahili is spoken by 5 million native speakers, mostly in the coast part of Kenya, Tanzania. Those are the native speakers. And then in terms of speakers all over Africa and the world, we have over 135 million. That means that is a great number of people. So, which means that this message is going to go across that many number of speakers in Kiswahili. So there has been ongoing civil wars in Somalia, and maybe some of you know about this, and the DRC, Republic of Congo. Repeated civil and cross-border wars in Kenya. In '92, we had a war. In 2007, we had one. Tanzania, not so much. Uganda, there has been a thing or two, people fighting, and which really impacts so much on the children. Mozambique, Burundi, Rwanda in 1994, we had the genocide. So one of the fastest, largest, and most brutal genocide in history in Rwanda. So some of the countries that speak Kiswahili, just to mention, is DRC, Kenya, Tanzania, Zanzibar. Zanzibar is part of Tanzania. Uganda, Zambia, Mozambique, Rwanda, Burundi. Some Somali people speak Kiswahili. And most of the Somali community that came to the US passed through Kenya, so they speak Kiswahili. So that is why this message really needs to go to them. So as I was translating this, as a language teacher, first of all, because now I came to this project as somebody who has been in language, like teaching language, and also I was taught how to translate at the university. And as a language teacher, I can not only translate the message just the way it is, so I translated the culture also. So there are some things that maybe Zach will mention, like for example, dolls, children don't really have those. And then like guns, yes, we have guns, the police have guns and stuff, but most the people, when they fight, most of them use spears and machetes. So I translated those ones, and also the kind of food. I mean, in the introduction it says the children are eating vegetables. Yes, we do, but in this sense, vegetable is kind of cultural, because in the US, as I found out, is you guys eat raw vegetables. In Kenya, that's not a thing at all. So I translated that and brought something else which most East Africans and Central Africans understand. So I'm going to read just 2 paragraphs of what really caught my eye and what we really needs to pass across, the message that needs to pass across. I would have read in Kiswahili if any Kiswahili speaker was in here, but I will try reading in English, which is not easy for me. What you see in these strange places is something called war. It's something a lot of folks choose to ignore because you feel safe in your home with your mom, your dad or your grandma, your cat or your dog, hugging your teddy in a soft bed at night. Dad's checked for monsters. There's no need for fright. It's easy to think every kid lives this way. but that's simply not true. The world of today, in a whole lot of places less lucky than we, destruction and sadness are all people see. In faraway places, in strange-sounding names, people live in fear of soldiers and planes, the thunder of hundreds of thousands of bullets, the rat-a-tat of their guns as they shoot. A family's home where they'd lived all their life can all disappear in the course of a night. It's easier to fear and to blame on one's fight, and it's not their fault. To them, it's equally frightening. Fighters may do many terrible things, but when you look at their lives, you'll see where it begins. Often, it starts with a childhood trauma, a child your age stolen away from his mama, children hurt by the world, filled early with rage. You can watch it unfold as you go through each page. So this is really what caught my eye, and I was like, we need to talk about this. Like, what is war? How does it happen? And what can children do about it? So I decided that I was going to put my time, even if I'm busy. I'm a graduate student. I teach, so grading every week. And right now I'm grading papers, but I was like, I'm going to put time into this because it means so much, and this information needs to pass across. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jason. That was nice to hear those spoken out loud. So I read through Jason's translation, and I speak no Kiswahili, but it flows really, really sweetly. There's something really poetic about the language, so I was very pleased with it despite a whole lack of context. But I ran it through a couple of development specialists and child psychologists and artists who are native speakers, and they were just blown away by Jason's translation. So I have full faith in what he's done despite having no capacity to read it. So I spent a lot of time in Germany raising two half-German children, and I didn't spend too much time until recently with the language. I learned through my kids, I learned through context, and at a certain point, for visa reasons, I had to. And so this is where I met Manuela. Manuela became my German teacher, and she went above and beyond. She took me from a lower intermediate level to an advanced level where I am fully fluent, can engage in conversations with mayors and others and run this project in German, due solely to Manuela's influence. But I also attended courses with her with refugees, and I watched her engage with them and with their lives and bring them into Easter celebrations and bring them into Carnival, where you are surrounded by alcohol and scantily clad individuals, and she made it safe and she made it cool and she made it a part of your new home. And so as I was looking for a broader translation, I thought no one could be better in my mind than Manuela for this. So I'm introducing her now for the German version, and I ask you, in the event of anything, to forgive her jet lag as she arrived from Germany last night, where they lost all of her baggage, and she's a little bit, she's doing great though, and I have full faith in what comes next.
I'm totally exciting. You have to excuse my English, and it's a very, very big thing for me to sit here right now. And as Zach said, I arrived yesterday evening without anything, and I have to buy a new dress for coming here. Yes, and it's a pleasure to meet you all. Hello. My name is Manuela Schuster, and I'm from Germany. But I once was a refugee too. I didn't have to escape from war, but from a repressive communist regime in Romania. Shortly before I was born, my father had to leave the country, and not until 2 years later he had saved enough money to be able to let my mother and me follow him to Germany. 2 more years later, I became a German citizen, and still being very happy that Germany had welcomed me with open arms and long since became my home country. My own experience in my childhood today and my motivation to help people from foreign countries finding a new home in Germany. And therefore I'm teaching German as a foreign language, because you need language. Yeah. My classes include students that prepared for German university, as well as people that had to escape from war, from Syria, Yemen, but also from countries where the Arab Spring took place, like Egypt and Tunisia, for example. Because I experienced the consequences of war every day in class, I didn't hesitate a second as Zachary asked me if I would like to assume the translation of his book into German. The concept of this book also convinced me. Most children's books about war only shows the horrors and the consequences. They warn about it, but I don't think they satisfy the child's curiosity. Children want to know how things happened, and they want to know why and what they can do about it. Yeah. And that is exactly the deficit in the children's books, which is often complained about teachers in Germany, who have to deal with children from both worlds. And a lot of my friends are German teachers for primary school, and those on the one hand who spend their lives in peace in Germany, and on the other hand, children that are new in class, and because they had to escape from war. And I think this book is very different from the other books. And I want to read out, and it's very, very well shown through the following excerpt. Want to know why hate's so easy to breed? Think of your own family's history. If your grandpa told you of a murderous band, of men in the next town who took his grandpa's land, he told you about your relatives that they killed, do you honestly think that you would be thrilled? If you went over there and saw in that place a girl of your age with a smile on your face, you wouldn't think, as so many do, that her whole family is guilty, the little girl too? You would remember, like a reasonable kid, that this girl didn't do what her ancestors did. Whatever has happened in the past century or two, the little girl is as guiltless as you. The emerging of a conflict and how to live on for generation and generation is illustrated by an example which is, I think, very understandable for a child. But the child also learns that not some anonymous men have to bear the consequences of aggression, but maybe the little girl sitting next to him in the class that had to leave her home country because of war. Would the child blame the new girl in class for crimes committed by her grandparents' generation? No. Of course it wouldn't, because it's a reasonable kid. By this example, the children not only recognize the roots of war, they understand that they all are the same and maybe could have found themselves in the same situation in their home country, and therefore it lies in their hands to break through the spiral of hatred and prevent future from wars. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was great.
Thank you.
So Manuela's translation is also beautiful. I've checked through, so that one I can actually understand. And it's going to be vetted by a series of trauma psychologists and other experts prior to publication, but we have that network set up, and they are already starting to go through it, which is good because it's going to go in combination with the work of Riyad Al-Hamad, who is a former lawyer from Aleppo, Syria, and is now a refugee in Germany. He spent 2 years in a refugee camp in Turkey where his second child was born. His first was born in Syria and became a refugee at a very young age, and his third was just born in Germany, a very international family with a very traumatic story that is entirely affected by war. He is fluent in at least 4, but I believe 5 languages, and one of them is English, and so he was also taken with this project. But what I've noticed as a German teacher in Germany is that the dual language release of books about war are incredibly effective conflict avoidance and teaching tools. And so when his is finally complete, it will also be released in a simultaneous publication with Manuela's work, used within multiple integration projects. And obviously, within all of these conflict zones that speak the Arabic language, and with all of these refugees coming from Arabic-speaking regions, this is a very important tool of demystifying and perhaps removing some of the cloud of fear around the subject of war and letting children speak more honestly about what's going on in their heads. The last one, so I mentioned our Flex A-Smile grantee. Nadina Fejes she was born right before the war began in the former Yugoslavia, and she lived her first decade of life in conflict. She, after her A-Smile grant, then continued on through an American university, 2 of them actually, and ended up at Oxford, where she got an MSc in evidence-based social intervention, so focusing on trauma avoidance and intervention and also conflict intervention. And she is working with her mother, a woman who raised 3 children in war, and a lawyer in Yugoslav and Serbian companies. And both of them are members of a minority ethnic group within an ultra-nationalist country. And they are bringing their experience to contextualize the war project. I have my own experience, so I was not quite fluent, but fluent enough in the languages that were once Serbo-Croatian to join an OSCE election monitoring mission in Bosnia, where I thought I could use my language skills. But I was forbidden from the first moment from doing so because of the experience they had had in a previous election where a Bulgarian election monitor had answered the question, "What time is it?" in a local dialect that sounded very much like Bulgarian. And as soon as he looked at his watch, they shot him in the gut. And this is the nationalism, this is the othering, that even someone's dialect is enough to get you killed in an ultra-nationalist environment like post-Yugoslavia. And so this is a tool we hope to use in denationalizing these groups. So additionally, it's not just for kids. The book ideally will be read together by parents and children. There are questions that a child will raise when they read this. It's 300 lines. It's not going to be every answer. There's some things that if the child decides to dig deeper with a why question, they're going to need someone to guide them. But it has also been deemed safe enough by trauma psychologists to be found in a library by an 8-year-old, picked out and read alone without causing the cloud of fear. So it finds a balance between these two things, but ideally parental or teacher guidance is the way to do this. But along with that, parents find new worldviews through their children's books. I know I have, as I've read to my kids. I find treasures in the old books that I read as a child that I'm reading to them now that I hadn't recognized when I was a kid, that completely change how I think about the world, and this happens all the time when we read new things. Additionally, it's easier, much of the time, to receive new information via pictures and verse than it is through a really thick document of facts. So I know I brought a German Arabic kids book about being a refugee and war into my German class that I teach to refugee mothers in my small town in Germany. And we were going through it and going word by word to figure out what they know and what they don't know, and we'd made it about a third of the way through the book when they interrupted and asked me, can you maybe leave the room for 10 minutes? We're going to sit here and read it in Arabic because this is really, it's touching us, it's really intense, and we would just like to not be interrupted by German language right now, but really just go through this kid's book. And I came back 10 minutes later and they were drying their eyes because a kid's book can really touch an adult who's in a similar situation. It can be used as a trauma therapeutic device, but it can also just help them come to grips with the world around them as it is falling apart. So that is what I am hoping to have this do. I'm going to do a last selection prior to the question answer if I have time. So, the root of the problem, see this is a gem, is a word we all use, and that word is them. We think to ourselves, what's wrong with those people? And that little thought is the root of all evil. Them and those people are just human beings, with noses for smellings and eyeballs for seeings, with brains made for thinking incredible thoughts, as amazing as yours, believe it or not. You may stare at some person in strange patterned clothes, with a different skin color or pointier nose. This person is special, this person is new. Don't think, what is that? Instead think, who are you? Because whatever you're thinking as they stare back at you, this new human being is probably thinking it too. It's so very easy to fall into such patterns of division about all these things that don't matter. So try to remember, if you start thinking mean thoughts about folks from other religions or races or birth spots, that you're really no different from those children of war, just a million times luckier in where you were born. Wherever you go, whatever you do, this whole great big world is made up of you. It's made up of I, and it's made up of me, and it's made up of us and of ours and of we. When we allow people to go and divide us, we lose so very much of the good that's inside us. And I have one for the State Department. Countries that today trade for computers and cars, that support one another in missions to the stars, almost always fought large wars in their history, whose reasons to us today are a mystery. Creating prejudice over the way people speak, or look, or pray, till it reaches its peak, of people killing people with anger and hate, until someone says, stop, and then everything's great. Nothing happened at all, or so everyone pretends, ignoring years of fighting, as though they'd always been friends. Pointless deaths, all those millions who died. There were plenty of options, if the right people had tried. We've lost millions of people who could have been friends, because lazy leaders decided to make war, not amends. And in each of those millions of people was something bright, something sparkling that could have brought to this world new light. We thank the State Department for its diplomatic mission and for keeping us from war.
Okay. Sure. Thank you. Thank you, all three of you, for your inspiring words and for all that you're doing to put the message of this book out there into the world in different languages. As you were speaking, I had a little flashback of my own to a few years ago. I have a 13-year-old brother. A few years ago, I was visiting Chicago where he lives and was just going through some of his school books and came across his assignment notebook. And on the back of it were scribbled ISIS all over like the back cover of his book. And I went up to him and I was like, hey, what the heck is this? Did someone write this on your book? And apparently there was some bullying in his school, and that's an experience. He goes to a pretty diverse school, but that's an experience other young Muslim kids in his age group at that time were experiencing. And I think about the powerful impact that this book can have on young people who have gone through crisis situations, war-torn communities, but also the ways that it can impact young people like my young brother, who grew up in the United States. He hasn't experienced war firsthand, but all of these issues impact him in a very, I don't know, challenging way. And so I hesitate to give him this book because one of the things I'm concerned about is I don't want to further traumatize or depress young people who are dealing with bullying or other types of issues here in the United States. So I'm wondering if you can talk to, I know you've consulted with child psychologists and teachers and educators, but how do we use this kind of a text with young people and not risk putting ideas in their minds or giving them feelings of depression or guilt or sadness about conflicts that they're not directly connected to? And secondly, related to this, I'd love to see this incorporated in school curriculums and things like that. And I was wondering if you all have considered approaching that as one possible way that your book could reach more young people.
To your second question, we would love that. That would be excellent, and we would be totally open to anyone taking this book and including it, and we would gladly work with anyone. We're working in Germany with some teachers and psychologists who are hoping to include this in curricula, and hoping to do something similar in the United States. To your first question, one of the problems that I find in this book is the reason that it is a book for 8 and above is that children with short attention spans, this is not a book to not finish. This is not a book to go a third of the way through and then just sit out. This is a book that really needs to be brought to a concluding point. So you sit there and wonder, what can I do? Remember there can be world peace, and that peace starts with you. You can show love, and you can be nice to everyone, even those who are mean to you. Don't let them push you around, but try to get in their brain. What makes them so mean? What caused them such pain? If you don't fight, but instead ease the hurt from their mind, they might follow your lead, and to others be kind. If we all started seeing through other people's eyes, war would be over, no more have to die. And all of this all starts with you. You have more strength than you think you do. Starting with you and your compassionate powers, we can stop sending bombs and begin sending flowers. So that is why I would do a complete reading and not simply depress your brother with selections.
Do we have other questions? I have a question about the graphics. I was trying to read your slides.
Sorry.
Well, about the artwork.
Okay.
You've spoken to the language and the words, but not to the artwork and the graphics.
The artwork is hard. The artwork is volunteer and not always brought to fruition. Sometimes the project has different deadlines, and we need new art. I cannot deny that we welcome artistic interpretations. That is, in fact, with the next steps. We are attempting to take any money that is earned from purchases or donations to this project into an interactive, free, user-friendly website for children to have their own edition in their own language, but also with multiple artistic interpretations that they can click along. It's a broader artistic vision that would need a lot of blueprints to explain. But it would be multiple artistic interpretations along with the multiple linguistic interpretations is our hope. The stereotypical imagery that exists in some kid books, I cannot say that we have necessarily fully managed to get away from in this one, and I do seek further artistic assistance and further illustration, so that is a next step for us.
Thank you. Any more questions?
Have you been able to get your book into the hands of leaders, country leaders, and the Pope and
I have
things
not.
like that?
I have that kind of access I do not have. I have access to good local leaders, and I have some good friends who have decent-sized positions, but top folks, it would be lovely to have them take a look at this and be involved in this. But at this point, it has been local globally local, but definitely entirely local.
Any more? Okay, then let's thank our panelists today for their presentation.
Thank you guys. You've been a great audience, and thank you for taking your lunch break to come hang out with us. And I hope that it interested you, and I hope you'd like to get involved. And we would love to talk more following the event. Thank you, Jason. Here is contact information in the event that you need it. That was good. And we have copies of the text for those that want. So you can pick up your copy and take a look and see if it is something that interests any projects you're working on. So feel free.